Welcome back to Sunday Night Dinners with Deborah. So today we're going to be making a loaf of white bread. It's a potato bread that has potato flakes and milk powder in it. And it's just about the softest, most flavorful white bread I have ever had the privilege of making. So I've adapted it from a recipe that I found from the Needy homesteader, Needy like kneading bread. She did a potato roll, like dinner roll size, and I tried it. I made it the first week. I made it the dinner rolls exactly how she made it. Second week, I made hamburger buns. Later that week, I decided it was so delicious I wanted to try it as a loaf of bread because I thought it would make a great slice of toast. I was right. So I've adapted it a little bit from her recipe. The method's a little different as well. Let me share that with you. So this is a very easy recipe. It's very forgiving. So we take 1.5 cups of warm water. You want it to be above room temperature, almost like the temperature of your blood. And you place that in first. This is the only time that it makes a difference of what order it goes into. Now I'm using instant yeast, 2 teaspoons of that. So you put the yeast straight onto the warm water. 3 tablespoons of sugar. Now you could use any other type of sweetener as well. I've just used white sugar in this. Honey would be particularly delicious. Or even molasses would be lovely. My neighbor was telling me about how she was making pumpkin bread, and I thought, well, that would be lovely with molasses. Now we're gonna add in bread flour. Now bread flour has a higher gluten than regular just white flour. Now this is 3.5 cups. And now we take here our potato flakes. Potato flakes you can buy at a bulk store. They are sometimes called instant mashed potatoes, but it's just dried potato flakes. So 1/4 cup and 1/4 cup of powdered milk. The flakes of potato and the powdered milk is what gives it the beautiful soft texture. So then we add to it 4 tablespoons of room temperature butter. It's a little cold in my house, so I just cut it up and laid it out so that it would come to room temperature. Add 1 egg. 1.25 teaspoon of salt. Now I have yet to put additives in here, such as garlic, snipped up herbs, some chives, but I'm sure it would lend itself beautifully to flavorings. Now we just stir up this bowl. See, it's quite easy to incorporate. It's quite a soft dough. This definitely could be done in the KitchenAid. I happen to like making bread by hand. So now it's all, if you can see the texture of that, it's all quite shaggy. I'm going to turn that out onto my counter. So I'm turning this out onto my counter. So I'm sprinkling, I have about 1/2 cup of flour set aside here. So in total, you're going to need about 4 cups of flour. 3.5 in the dough, and then about another 1/2 cup to sprinkle on your clean counter. So I just turn this out onto the counter. I scrape the edges of my bowl to get all of the goodness out of that bowl. And then I take some cooking spray and I spray the inside of the bowl. And I do this before I put my hands into the dough. And then I take some cooking spray and aluminum foil because that's going to go on top of our bowl. I want to show you my actual procedure for what I do for bread. My spoon is kind of wet and it will be very sticky. So I sprinkle a little bit of flour on it. Right over my bread. And because I've sprinkled the flour, the dough is drier and will come off of that spoon easier. And if I find my fingers are getting sticky, I just cover them in a little bit of flour as well. So I take as much dough as possible off of the spoon. Let me set the spoon aside. So now I come around here. So how to knead. So I've gathered all of my dough together, just pushed it together, and now I push it down. And it's still all just chunks, like just rough, shaggy pieces. And I gather it up at the end, and I push it away. I gather it up at the end, and I push it away. And now I've got some wet spots and some dry spots. So I take some of the loose flour from the counter and put it onto the wetter spots. So I gather it up in the sides and lift up the front and pull it back to the end of the dough and then push it away. I gather it up and I push it away. And so I did that, and now I gather it up and I'm turning it around 1/4 turn and I push it away. Gather it up and push it away. Turn it, gather it up, push it away. Okay, and now because it's gathered up into a very rough, shaggy dough, I can start using, instead of my fingers, I can start using the heels of my hands to push it away. Gather it up, push it away. Gather it up, push it away. Gather it up, push it away. Now I'm flipping it over to gather up the loose flour that was on the counter. I gather it up and pushed it away. Gather it up, push it away. I can probably stop saying that now. And you want to knead the bread, and it's starting to get a touch sticky, so I'm just going to add a little bit of flour. You only need to, you're only required to knead the bread for 4 or 5 minutes. Because what you're doing then is you are developing the gluten, which gives you the structure of a high, strong, but soft loaf. You want a loaf that is strong enough that will not collapse in the oven, which is where the gluten comes in, but you want it soft enough that it's delicate and pillowy. And once you know the rhythm of kneading bread, bread no longer has to be intimidating. Adding just a touch more flour. I keep adding flour because I keep feeling a little bit of stickiness. Once it no longer feels sticky, once it just feels soft, that's when I know the dough will be ready. And I can feel it almost there. It's a very tactile sensation. And it's also quite a beautiful sensation. You feel like you're feeding the earth now. Look at that. Once you can place a dent, you can push in a little dent and it no longer pops out. That's when your bread is ready to go into your lightly greased bowl. So I set it in upside down and then I kind of roll it around so that it's greased ever so slightly on all sides. Now I'm going to set that into my oven. I turned my oven on just before I gathered the ingredients. I set it at 350 just for about 4 or 5 minutes, just for it to get warm. And then I turned the oven off because you just want a slightly warmed place for your dough to rise. Now, if it's the heat of the summer, you can just put it up on your counter. Other places that people also suggest, on top of your refrigerator, or if you're doing laundry, on top of your clothes dryer. We cover it loosely. I cover it with a tin foil because I used to try and cover it with tea towels, and my dough would rise so high it would stick to the tea towels, and I ended up throwing out tea towels. So the tin foil made more sense. So I'm going to set this in my oven for 1 hour. Remember, my oven is off, but it still has some of that residual heat, and it will rise for 1 hour, and it will be pretty much doubled in size, and then we'll pull it out and shape it into a loaf. Now, the easiest way to clean up your counter is with a bench scraper. And it just takes it all up, so then you can just wash it down. And there you have it. So it's been an hour, and now we're gonna see what it's like. I've taken the bread out of, or the bread dough out of the oven, and I take the foil off and I set it aside. And so here we are. It's doubled. Now what we do is, it's called punching down your dough. And you take your fingers and make them nice and strong and just go straight in. Oh. So see, you have those beautiful, what you're doing is you're taking all the air out of the bread. We pull the dough out, set it on top of our flour, and now we're just going to turn it over a couple of times just to make sure all the air has been deflated. And see, I've just roughly shaped it into a bit of a loaf. I take a bread pan. This is a standard loaf size. Mine is probably, it used to be my mother's, so it's probably a good 50 years old or something. And I take my cooking spray and just spray it generously. I lift this up and set that down into my bread pan. I take my sprayed tin foil and just set it back over top, and it's going to go back into that oven for half an hour. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to put a baking sheet underneath that bread pan just in case it overflows. The very first time I attempted this in a loaf format, this recipe completely overflowed the bread pan, and I was picking bread dough out of the racks of my oven. So just in case, I'm going to get that pan. So just set right on top. I'm going to put it back in the oven. Again, the oven is off, and I'm just going to let it grow for about another 30 minutes, and then I'm going to pull it out again. So it's been just about 30 minutes, and what we're going to do is we're going to pull the bread dough out of the oven. We're going to punch it down once again, reshape it into a loaf, and then we're going to let it rise sitting up on the counter, and I'm going to preheat my oven to 350 degrees. So as you see, it's it's kind of right at the top of the pan. So I'm going to just set that aside. I am just going to punch it down and kind of just roll it up again into a dough loaf shape. And then it's going to rise just again and lift it. And to lift it up gently, just kind of scoop it up under. And I put this foil back on top until my oven has preheated. Our oven is preheated to 350. I take off the foil, and I've got my nice loaf of bread. See how it's risen again? Now I'm just going to pop it into the oven for 30 minutes. Now, making bread. Making bread is one of the most fundamental things that you can learn in a kitchen. If you can make bread, you can make a meal. You can make breakfast. You can turn an ordinary meal into an extraordinary meal just by adding fresh baked bread. I don't know anybody who can resist that smell. It elevates even the humblest food to something that's worthy of Sunday night dinners. And it's so easy, very inexpensive ingredients, and just a few tweaks of ingredients, additions, subtractions, technique changes, gives you different types of bread, different styles of bread. Buns, hamburger buns, hoagies, soup buns, challah, bagels, English muffins. They're all a basic bread recipe. And once you've mastered it, you can go anywhere with it. So here we are. Timer's about to go off. And what I've done is I've taken about a teaspoon of butter and just set that on top of my stove while my bread bakes, because we're going to brush that butter onto our bread as soon as it comes out of the oven. The timer just went off. Oh my. Oh, see that? That's beautiful. Now, one way you can thump the top and you hear that hollow tap. That tells you that it is baked all the way through. The other way is to lift it up. Now this takes a little bit of fireproof hands, or you can lay it into a clean tea towel and just turn it over. And we're thumping the underside again to hear that solid thump, which it got. And remember, this is still very hot. Now I'm putting it back in the tray. And I've got my melted butter that I just let melt on top of my stove while it baked. And I take a brush and just brush some butter on top. And that ensures that the crust of the bread will be soft, because I want this to have a nice soft top. And now we just let this cool for about 5 minutes, still in the pan, and then I'll take it out and put it on a rack to cool. So it's been about 5 minutes. It's still quite warm, but not crazy hot. So I just take it out and I just set it onto the rack, just so that there's airflow underneath as well, so it'll cool. And see, as you can see, it's a soft crust. So now I've got my loaf of bread. It's cooled. It's still a touch warm, but use a serrated knife always when you're cutting bread. It just makes for a nicer slice. Look Look at that crumb. Absolutely lovely. You can see how soft it is, how moist it is. Oh, absolutely lovely. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again.